Introduction to Neurology. Nerve cells, or neurons, are excitable cells which do not reproduce and demonstrate extreme longevity. There are approximately 100 billion neurons in the brain and central nervous system. Each neuron has a cell body, and with it has all the typical organelles of any other cell. It has a nucleus, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and so on. Additionally, it has a number of neuronal processes. Dendrites are short processes that receive information from and pass information to other cells, other adjacent neurons. Each neuron or nerve cell has a single axon, which is a long process that passes information typically away from the cell body. Within the central nervous system, there's a number of other cells, supporting cells that maintain the structure and organization of the central nervous system. And there's approximately 900 billion of these cells throughout the central nervous system. The nervous system is broadly divided up into the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. These are housed within the skull and the vertebral column, and this is where we will find the cells themselves. When we look at the brain and spinal cord, we can identify grey matter, which is where the majority of the cells are found, and white matter, which mostly contains projections, the axon and dendrites. We then have the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system with its target organs, whether they be sensory, visceral, circulatory, or muscular. Information from the periphery is relayed to the central nervous system via the sensory division of the peripheral nerves. The information passing from the central nervous system to muscles, to organs, to blood vessels occurs via the motor system, the efferent system. The efferent system is subdivided into the somatic portion, which has the effect of controlling skeletal muscle, and the autonomic portion, which has the effect of controlling target organs and blood vessels. When we look at the vertebral column, we divide it up into four primary sections: the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. There is also the coccygeal section, which is the redundant tailbone. And in the vertebral column itself, we identify each vertebra by a letter and by a number. The letter denoting the section it belongs to, so cervical would be C, thoracic is T, lumbar is L, and sacral is S, and the number denoting whereabouts it lies within that section. The spinal cord is also divided into segments. Each segment gives rise to a pair of mixed spinal nerves, one passing to the left, the other passing to the right. Each spinal nerve is identified in a similar way to the vertebrae. There's a total of 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Although there are only 7 cervical vertebrae, there are 8 cervical nerve roots. The first cervical nerve root, the C1 nerve root, exits between the skull, the occiput, and the top of C1. The second exits between C1 and C2, and so on. C8 exits between the bottom of C7 and the top of T1. Below that, from T1 onwards, the nerve roots will exit between the corresponding vertebra and the vertebra below. So T6 exits between T6 vertebra and T7 vertebra. Each mixed spinal nerve exits the vertebral column via the intervertebral foramen. And the mixed spinal nerve itself is made up from motor and sensory roots. And these fuse to form the mixed spinal nerve. So in here we can see this is the spinal cord, this is the posterior aspect of the vertebra, this is the vertebral body anteriorly. Here we have the dorsal root, the blue area, which is the sensory root, and anteriorly we have the motor root. So all motor fibers exit the spinal cord anteriorly. All sensory fibers enter the spinal cord posteriorly. But by the time we get to the intervertebral foramen here, the fibers of the sensory root and the fibers of the motor root have merged, forming the mixed spinal nerve. The mixed spinal nerve then continues peripherally, and it then divides into branches, an anterior branch and a posterior branch, the anterior primary ramus and the posterior primary ramus. And each of the rami, each of the branches, are mixed, containing sensory, motor and autonomic nerves. So here we have the posterior primary ramus, here going posteriorly, that will go around and supply the muscles and the skin and the vessels, essentially the back. Here we have the anterior primary ramus that passes on peripherally to mix with other nerve roots to supply the skin, the muscles, the vessels of the upper limb, lower limb and trunk. The posterior primary rami has been mentioned pass posteriorly to supply sensory and motor innervation to the back. The anterior primary rami in the thoracic region pass forward and run round in between the ribs, supplying the skin and the muscles of the thoracic region. These are known as the intercostal nerves. However, the anterior primary rami in the cervical and lumbar and sacral regions pass forward. The fibers of each individual primary ramus divides and fuses with adjacent anterior primary rami, and these go on to form the peripheral nerves of the limb and the trunk. The area in which the primary rami, the anterior primary rami, divide and fuse together again are known as the plexi. And there are three main plexi that need to be learnt. Up here we have the brachial plexus. So all of these anterior primary rami fuse, divide and then fuse again to form the peripheral nerves that go down and supply the upper limb with its motor and sensory control. Here we have the intercostal nerves, and down here we have two more plexi. We have the lumbar plexus, and down here we have the sacral plexus, and they both supply the lower limb. It's from the plexi that we get our peripheral nerves, for example the sciatic nerve, the median nerve, the femoral nerve and so on.